now, but then I had another look at the emails now and it said 5 to 7. I don't know about that.
That's fine.
So it's you know, this is a less than an hour talk. We should still have some time to talk, and of course, once I leave the room, you don't have to. And it's great to be here. I talked last year, I think it was, to some of you, to this group. I certainly appreciate it. I'm an economist in the economics department, interested in inequality matters. In particular, not as a revolutionary so much, but as a reformist. I think the interesting thing about income inequality, income inequality is a bit of an epidemic in capitalism, market economies. It's increased a great deal. Why? That's obviously bad for people who become less equal, but it's actually bad for the system as well. And the interesting political thing that's happening, I think, since perhaps even before the global financial crisis, is that the right-wing politicians, or at least the more thoughtful ones, saying, gosh, this is not good for us, this is not good for the system. Market economies actually don't function very well. Apart from don't function decently, they don't function even efficiently with this amount of inequality. So that's when it becomes interesting from a political perspective. So that's why I call it the cancer within capitalism. It's perhaps a little lurid. Let's see. So, it's not the first time capitalism has been in crisis. The last major crisis, I guess 80 years ago now, was the Great Depression, in which for a whole decade, even more than that in some countries, Britain, at least 10, 15, sometimes % of the workforce were out of work. There were very few safety nets in those days. It was a pretty tough time. It looked to be a chronic problem of capitalism. And Marxists were saying, look, this is Marxists forecast this would happen. Capitalism would grow to the point where the rate of return on capital became so low that you get stagnation, and when you get stagnation, you get unemployment and eventually revolution. And the threat of revolution was of course quite plausible, because there had been a Marxist revolution already in Russia, led to the formation of Soviet Russia after World War I. And furthermore, Russia was not in depression. Soviet Russia was probably the fastest growing large economy in the world, and almost right through to almost to the middle. Communism, socialism owned from the middle third of the 20th century in terms of economic performance. So it was a worrying time for capitalists, and for people who preferred not to have a revolution. Now what happened then? Well, Keynes and Hitler, they bailed things out really. Keynes was John Maynard Keynes, the very great economist, the greatest economist of the 20th century, and so far still of the 21st century, who found Keynes was extremely worried. He thought this was a just likely disaster. He's a liberal in the old, not so much the laissez-faire liberal sense, but a sort of social, what we call a social democratic liberal. He thought he wanted to live in a decent society where he also had his property rights. So he said that this is a problem of capitalism. It is a systematic problem, but something could be done about it. In particular, the public sector, the government, should step in and at least just temporarily increase its own spending, get money back into the economy, get jobs, people having jobs, and that would multiply through. The people who got back into work would then go and spend their new incomes and give other people jobs. That doesn't sound like a very revolutionary and intellectual sense proposition to us, because he succeeded. But at the time, it was a revolutionary doctrine within market economies, in particular Britain and America. The orthodoxy then, called the Treasury orthodoxy, was that, oh no, in a time of economic crisis, government should get out of the way. Government is part of the problem. Government is inefficient and not so good at utilising resources and stuff. So we can't afford big government when we're in a big depression. And Keynes said, well, that's going to actually make things worse. Of course, in case you don't, you may ask me about this, but of course this is exactly, it's all come back again now with the austerity crisis, the Eurozone crisis right now, where you have people who say austerity is the way to get out of it. The Germans and some other countries are saying you have to create unemployment in your country to get fiscal probity again. And the expansionists are people saying, well, this is ridiculous. How can we correct our government deficits if our tax base is going down all the time because everybody's been thrown out of work? So we're right in the middle of this again now, but it's not quite so bad as it was then. Well, it was Hitler, as I say, who really demonstrated that Keynesian policies would work. Hitler, when he took over in Germany in the late 1920s, I think, or the early 1930s, immediately started a public works program, some of it rearmament, but also building autobahns, all sorts of stuff. And as a result, unemployment in Germany fell quite dramatically through the 30s. And then Hitler caused the Second World War, and then all the public spending went up in all the countries, and unemployment disappeared. So people after the war thought, gosh, we don't want another war, and the war was partly caused by depression, economic depression, and we want to do things well in the future, and so the modern mixed economy was a form to work state. So that was one crisis, pretty well averted. Now the threat, I think, the structural threat is capitalism has won the battle. Of course, the Soviet Empire disintegrated 22 years ago, so everyone's capitalist now, and they've got a little bit carried away with this, and the threat seemed to be unrestrained greed, manifested in inequality. Now you might say, isn't that what capitalism is about, unrestrained greed? That's the whole point of it, for better or for worse, the profit motive and all that, but it's not. And if Keynes was around, he would appreciate that now. That you can't actually run a market economy if everybody is totally greedy and grabby and just after their own interests. And we found that out. The world found that out 22 years ago when the communism collapsed and they sort of privatized everything and became market economies almost literally overnight. Thinking, at last we'll be rich, like the French and the British and the New Zealanders, we're going to be rich like them. The reverse happened. Their incomes, which were not too hot in the first place, now under communism, halved in a few years in the 1990s. It was a terrible time, especially for, not so much for Eastern Europe, but bad for them, because they hadn't been communist for so long. They'd been pushed into communism after the Second World War, but especially for the old communist country, the former Soviet Union, Russia and its former satellites. And what that revealed, I think, perhaps not just to them, but to us as well, what was lacking, what went wrong? Well, they didn't know how to behave in a capitalist economy. They thought you just went for it, and everybody opportunistic and greedy and everything. But when that starts happening, certain basic things don't exist anymore. Trust, willingness to trust people and be trustworthy, honesty, forbearance, things like that. We suddenly realize that a successful market economy doesn't work on unrestrained greed. It can't work on unrestrained greed because you just can't monitor everybody. So that people have to have a sense of what's reasonable, what's fair, and not taking too much. And when you do that, everybody can sort of cooperate and achieve some sort of prosperity. So we now know that let's say market economies or market capitalism or mixed market economies don't about unrestrained greed, and that therefore the symptoms of such greed are a problem. And that's, as I say, we're the more thoughtful members of the right, which would probably include members of the right in New Zealand and David Cameron and government perhaps, him anyway, in Britain. I don't know who the thoughtful members of the right are in America. God help us. But we've got to hope for something a bit better there, I know. But the people who are worrying about these things are worried about inequality. So, now, if inequality is bad, what's good? Perfect egalitarianism, everybody gets the same. No modern society ever, and approximately no pre-modern perhaps, but certainly no large-scale modern developed economy is perfectly egalitarian. And anyway, what's money all about anyway? Money doesn't guarantee happiness for a start. And I'm just going to go to explore this point a little bit before we get back, before we move on to inequality itself. About just over more than 10 years ago now, a British economist called Richard Layard came up with this famous graph of happiness as self-reported in various studies around the world, where people asked in the appropriate language, people like in the street or whatever, on a scale of 1 to 4, how happy are you? And the 1 to 4 is 4 is very happy, delight. Is very happy. 3 is, I think, somewhat happy. I think 2 is somewhat unhappy, and 1 is miserable. Obviously, there's language things here, but psychologists and others who deal with these social surveys are now coming to think that these answers do mean something, even across cultures and everything else. They have some coherence to them. Well, Layard took some of these studies and he said, let's see how it matches up with gross domestic product. Again, income, cash, development, and economic development. And this is one of his earlier diagrams. On the vertical axis there, we've got the happiness index. 100 means that everybody said 4. I'm just really grinning. We're very happy. A high mark means a large proportion. No, I'm sorry, that's not true. 100 in this particular scale is everybody saying either very happy or quite happy. So 100% is some version of happiness. And 0 is everybody saying, either quite unhappy or totally unhappy. So there's a sort of an imposed absolute here. Well, what Layard pointed out, pointed out, however, but he said there's 2 sort of bits here. One bit, or there's 3 bits really. I guess there's the sort of the vertical bit on the left-hand side. There's a bit sloping quite a lot next, and then there's what looks like a fairly flat bit over on the right on the top. And if you look, I don't know if you can see the countries there, if you can see what's going on there, what we've got here is the poorest countries, this is per capita GDP in US dollars, some of them are really miserable. Okay? If you look at the names here, there's a huge number of those ones there are parts of the former Soviet Union, the satellites. But also, there's a big variation. There are people without very much money, who, like in the Philippines, who 80% of whom self-report as being happy or very happy or somewhat happy. So in that sense, it's clear that money isn't everything. It's perhaps what you've been used to or what you expect, or it's perhaps other ways of living your life. However, I think it's reasonable to say that from about halfway out across to there, as countries have higher incomes, there is an increase in their self-reported happiness. They do enjoy that. Until you perhaps get to the top corner up there, if you look at the countries there, of course they're all rich countries now, because we're in a high per capita income bracket. And then it gets a bit flat now. And now we sort of find, well, it doesn't seem that in the rich countries, self-reported happiness is so strongly related to income. So you can see, you found New Zealand up there, and almost, and just to the right of it, Australia. Now, if you read the financial pages of the newspaper, or even the front pages of the newspaper, the income gap between New Zealand and Australia is sort of one of the top big 5 long-running policy or political issues, at least it is in New Zealand, the Australian. But it is nice to say, oh, we've got a 20-30% per capita GDP gap with the Aussies. It's actually a bit small now there because these particular numbers are about 15 years old. It's quite high. But we don't seem to have a happiness gap with Australians. We're just about on par there. So should we be worried about the income gap? Well, that's that's not a question I'll answer here. It is a reasonable question to ask. And so sometimes people who would, on the one hand, be quite critical of materialism and reliance, on money and wealth and stuff, and look, that's not all life's all about. On the other hand, they might be also very fussed about income inequality. I guess what I would say from that is that at the very least, you may be able to have some income inequality across countries or within them, but you do have a problem if a lot of people can't look after themselves in a reasonable way. But how big a problem it is from this data, it would be hard to say. Now, the second little story to set this up is this is taken from the net. This is a woman in Kenya, Joyce Maremu. Why is she laughing? She is laughing. She's quite happy. She was caught up in dreadful genocidal tribal stuff in Kenya in the 90s. She had to flee. She had a farm and everything. She had to flee her farm with her children, leave everything behind. Ended up as a beggar in the streets of Nairobi. So why is she laughing? Well, obviously she's not a beggar anymore, because she hooked up with one of these microfinance, microcredit, or non-governmental organisations that you may come across. They're very interesting in these countries, which basically work on the basis of giving loans to people who want to set up small businesses who can't get anything out of the regular banking system because they're too poor to have any security or they haven't got even a credit rating. And these institutions, and the famous innovator of this is the Grameen Bank, which started in Bangladesh, lend almost entirely exclusively to women, and the security they require is they say to the woman in the village or whatever, you guys get together, 5 or 6 or maybe 10 of you, and then each of you puts forward each time period one of your members to come up and ask for the loan so they can start a little business or something. And who's going to guarantee it? The rest of you are. So it's sort of like almost an honour system. But it's a little bit smarter than an honour system, a little bit more cunning than that, because if the person who's getting the loan fails, then all the other ones, of course, won't go to get loans themselves. So they have an incentive to help each other and make sure it gets done. Well, these microfinance systems, microcredit, have been extraordinarily successful. I think that's fair to say. Very small loans. We're not talking about the student loan here. We're talking hundreds of that sometimes, just $50 or whatever, just to buy some produce to set up a little store on the market. Have led many people, women and their families, out of really bad poverty into something better. So this particular organisation is called Jamii Bora. It means good families in Swahili because the people who founded it actually thought that the poor people doesn't go with bad families. There's good families here, good people, smart people, but they're poor, so there's everything about it. And what happened, so this particular NGO works on a, they say, you have to bring us, every dollar you bring us, we'll lend you another $2 on top. So you have to actually scrape together some savings to start with, and then they multiply it. So she started off with a loan of 25, equivalent of US $25. She's had 11 loans since then, because she keeps paying it back and then getting another one. And so she's got, Joyce and her sons are running it. I got this off their website, or the original story I read about in the New Yorker magazine. They've got all sorts of things going on. They've got a video show organised as a cinema, they've got a couple of restaurants, they've got mobile catering service, distributing lunches to schools, and now they're getting to making soft drink. And they've got 45 employees in this family business with her sons from the community, and she's always been a mentor and an inspiration to other people, the same thing. Now, she's still, Kenya actually isn't on here, but Kenya would be, I don't know, where would Kenya be here? We've got India, Bangladesh, Kenya might be around out there in terms of incomes, somewhere about there. It's still a poor country, and she's still, by our standards, a poor person. Those are these businesses. She's not a wealthy person by our standards, or even by some Kenyan standards, but what does she have? This is from the New Yorker story that I read about this in. This is from Ingrid Munro, who with her husband, she's Swedish, husband I think is Canadian, were working in an NGO in Kenya, and the job ran out, but they realised a particular job they're on came to an end. But the local Kenyans wouldn't let them go. They said, "No, you can't leave us now." So they started this business. They started this movement. And here she was talking about this. You know, when people visit the worst kinds of slums in Nairobi, and they walk around, people in their little businesses and little homes, you know, almost always their first comment is, "Why are they so happy?" They're smiling, proud, with dignity, showing what they have achieved. And I say, it's because they have something today which they didn't have a month ago. And they have a plan or a dream of something they're going to have in a month's time that they don't have today. Now, to me, psychologically, that's the message there is it's not just what you've got, it's where you've come from and whether you think you can go somewhere else. And you might say, well, actually, income inequality is good for that. You know, if there's income inequality, you can aspire to join the rich and stuff. You've got somewhere to go. But I think we're not a poor country like Kenya and New Zealand or other developed countries, but I think the reason it's become almost a crisis in income inequality with us, or if we measure of that, is that it's the pushing down of the incomes of the people at the bottom in our society and others is sort of so pervasive and so much force to it that this sense of being able to work your way out, work your way forward, and make progress is being crushed. And then you get despair and you get other bad things happen. So that's why I think severe and apart from injustice of it all, that's why I feel that it's such a dangerous thing, even in our countries. Okay, well, take from this, it's not just where you are, it's where you're going, where you're coming from, that gives purpose to our lives. You need hope, you need a sense of control, or that what you do can make a difference to your life. And that's pretty good. Power make things better. And then you say, well, that's all fair enough. But where I differ now, as you'll see from many people concerned about income inequality, I think that last story is about work. In the market, market work just means work, going out and doing stuff that you get paid for, that other people won't get paid for and get benefit from. So my inequality solutions really centre on the idea of market work, actual work for money, along with other forms of work and other activity. That's when you really feel that you've done something and you deserve it. By market, I don't necessarily mean becoming an entrepreneur like Joyce and her family did, but getting up in the morning and doing on a good day's work for a good day's pay. So, do the slums of Nairobi have any relevance to New Zealand or other rich countries? I think they do. We don't have so many beggars in New Zealand, although we do have them. I don't know if we don't have so many or not. We have enough, sure. But there are many people struggling to get by in New Zealand, including most beneficiaries. If you're a beneficiary in New Zealand, if you're, say, a single mother on the DPB, and you're not cheating, you know what cheating means in the DPB, it means having the father of your children living with you, that's cheating. It's supposed to have anyone else in the house like that, or it's going out and doing a bit of work for money, and not declare, no, even if you declare it, you may lose your benefit. So, if you're not doing those things, you're on, I can never remember the number because it's so far away from the numbers that I live with in my daily life, I'm sorry to say, but it's not very much and it's not very far off the poverty line. So, is that a good, durable system for us to reduce inequality? And I think there's something holding them back, keeping them feel hopeful about making progress, and it's income, I think it's income inequality there. A lot of the market work they could get is would be very poorly paid, and it would be difficult for them to handle family responsibilities as well. So I think it's our fundamental socio-economic problem, political problem, social problem, cultural. just going back a little bit here to the Keynesian age, known as, in retrospect, as the Golden Age, after the Second World War, right through the West, through the capitalist countries and market economies, inequality decreased as incomes grew. So it was steady economic growth for everyone, I mean for the whole economy, but there was more growth for the people at the bottom than was at the top. Income inequality had got quite broad in the early part of the 20th century. It was mainly through capital incomes, big fortunes being established. They got sort of pretty wiped out of it, both by the Depression, actually, and by the war. The war was not a capitalist war, really, in that sense. It was a wage earners' war. And after the war, that continued. So that's why we call it a golden age. And in fact, it was transformational for many families and many people, say, in New Zealand. I know the late Bruce Jesson, the late great Bruce Jesson, said that his family went from having, the thing for him, they went from having a meat safe in the south side of the house during the war and stuff to a fridge, not long after the war. And he said, okay, since then we've gone to having bigger and bigger fridges. Okay, that's nice. The real step is when you move up to the middle classes in the sense of having kitchen appliances that can help them. They got a little cow. They didn't have a cow. That sort of became widespread in New Zealand and other countries. In effect, most New Zealanders indeed became economically, if not necessarily culturally middle class in just one generation. So the experience betterment, and that gave you hope. My parents, I'm a baby boomer. They'd grown up in depression, and then the war. As things got going after the war, though, they did fairly well. My father was a doctor, but he knew that all his children would be better. He'd probably be well. He's a doctor, so he's fairly well, upper middle class job. But you just knew that things would be better for your children and stuff. You expected progress. You expected things to be good. But unfortunately, the Keynesian model hadn't allowed for inflation, and 25 years of low unemployment, steady growth, made people a little bit complacent, and prices and wages started to edge up. And the neoliberals and the monetarists, who hated the Keynesian thing, had been working in the background for 25 years, the mixed economy, sort of prepared to triumph, jumped back in again and said, okay, you're leading us into dangerous inflation, you Keynesians. Unemployment isn't such a big deal, but we have to have a secure money supply and value of money and stuff like that. And they got Orthodox in New Zealand, which is partly that, but there's many other things as well. Thatcherism, Margaret Thatcher in the UK, and President Ronald Reagan in the United States, Reaganomics, some people call it. They definitely had a macroeconomic agenda, if you like, of taking over and making inflation the first priority and not worrying so much about unemployment. They didn't mostly say, and by the way, we're also here to restore the higher income share of the capitalist class, which has been eroded by the welfare state. They didn't say that out loud. In fact, they said something different. It wasn't supposed to increase inequality, what they were doing. And Ronald Reagan even famously talked about trickle-down economics, that if you cut taxes on the rich, that would lead to so much extra productivity and efficiency and wealth that everyone would benefit. Trickle-down theory. There you go. That's Ronald Reagan there on the left. Bush Senior there, and then we told them welcome trickle down. Yeah, right, as we would say. It didn't do that at all. It was trickle up, and quite a fast trickle too. And this is where we get into our part of history. There's just some sensational numbers here. They're just incredible. About 20 to 25 years ago, the United States is on the forefront of all this. We had one of the largest increases in income inequality in New Zealand overall, but it didn't take us as far as America because we started from a fairly relatively egalitarian position in the 70s. Americans sort of led the way here. The top 1% of income earners in the United States 25 years ago got about 8% of the pie in GDP. They more than doubled that to 18%, which is huge. It's the top 1%. The top 0.1%, the top 1,000, they get about, I forget the number, but they get about sort of half of the 18, and that's gone up even more. The super rich should really expand. About half the gains took place in a sector which had hardly existed before, which is the finance sector. We had banking and stuff, but we didn't have all this super duper merchant banking and finance and trading and stuff. And in a way, that's became responsible for the global financial crisis, because these people weren't doing anything useful, basically, so they invented all these fancy financial products and resold them around the world, and it suddenly turned out that they weren't actually anything. And we had the first global financial crisis, where the second one now, which is a different one, the Eurozone one, when the subprime mortgage crisis hit in the United States 4 years ago now. So this is connected to the global financial crisis and economic crisis. Blue-collar wages stalled, unskilled workers were hammered down, income inequality rose drastically in all the neoliberal countries, so partly the people at the top getting a lot, and where do they get it from? They mainly got it from the people at the bottom. Although the middle classes didn't do that well out of the line. Especially in the neoliberal countries, which are mainly the English-speaking countries. Us, Australia to a lesser extent than us, Canada to a lesser extent, some of the United States and the UK. A lot of the continental European countries, and also Japan, have not had nearly such big increases in inequality as we have. That's worth remembering. It doesn't have to happen, you know. And then I go back to this idea that the Joyce Vanumas of this world saying, I thought my life is better than it was a month ago, and it'll be better still next month, that just gets taken away. So, what could we, so you may disagree with that diagnosis or that setting up the problem, but if you want to do something about it, what could we do? Well, the orthodox solution, and this is from people on the left or on the centre, is what?
Go back to Keynesian.
Sorry?
Go back to what we were doing.
Yeah, well, not really.
Taxes, the rich.
Taxes, yeah. The office, yeah. For most people, it almost, the word they immediately bring in is redistribution. And what that means is through the tax system. So that's the orthodox. You redistribute through taxes and benefits. In other words, after the money's been earned, don't go back to the way it was before. So redistribution means we're not going to go back to the earned income distribution when the top 1% didn't take in the first place nearly so much. They left much more on the table to be earned. But we say, we can't stop them getting all this money, but we'll grab some back through the tax system. That's sort of the centre left, or even centre right, or centre remedy now. But I'm not in favour. I don't think this is the way to do it. The metaphor I do is it's like treating the sick in a hospital. So, gosh, we have all these sick people, poor people, let's try and do something with them, rather than asking how do they get sick in the first place? Why can't they earn a decent income to start? How do the top 1%, the top 0.1% get away with grabbing all that stuff in the beginning? Then they don't get sick in the first place. And I don't think it really works very well. Once, especially people who can afford good tax advisors, once they get their hand on the stuff, it's very hard to get it back from them. All sorts of ways of sheltering it and keeping it from it. So I'm not saying I'm with that. I'm hoping President Obama will let George Bush's tax breaks for the rich in America expire, and they won't again blow them over. Of course I do, but I don't think that's going to solve the problem. And they also, some of them have to say, well, hang on, we may have 80% of the income, but we pay 40% of the income tax. That's true in America. They actually pay a huge slice of the income tax. So they might say, we're paying too much. Some of them do say that. You might get much sympathy with that, but they do pay most of the tax. And in fact, they do pay more tax when you cut the tax a bit, mainly not because they work harder, but because they bring stuff that they've hidden to keep it away from taxes, if the tax rate's a bit lower, they're more likely to declare it. So there are some issues there. But I think the way to do it is just to look, before people not to get sick in the first place. In other words, for them to be economically healthy and have good jobs and stuff in the first place. And there's two key elements here in my remedy, the recipe for doing something about this. I think globalization, a huge topic of course, forced globalization as I call it, pushed upon us, makes it very difficult to, well, it exacerbates income inequality, especially at the top, because it globalizes the labour markets for the superstars, while also globalizing the low-wage factory jobs. So we need to be willing to consider pulling back from globalization, not going back to being the Albania or North Korea or whatever, but just not making not being taken in all the time by globalization as something as a force either for good or bad, but inexorable, necessary force. We need to carry it out in space. And I think that if you want to go back to where we were before, what was the key difference if we look at the economy was the fact that all our countries have big manufacturing sectors. That's where most of the blue-collar jobs are. It's where skilled and even unskilled workers can earn a decent living making stuff. You can't do much with agriculture, you can't employ too many people, and services, well, they're typically on top of manufacturing. So let's go back to making stuff. And I point out that no country in history, from the very first rich country or industrializer, Britain, to Indonesia today, we had a trade mission there recently, achieved economic development through, quote, free trade. And every country did it by fostering their own industry, making stuff. Often with a view to exporting it, of course, as the Chinese do, but realizing you can't really achieve development unless you've got the centre of your economy flourishing. Our leaders don't get this. They're still doing the old 90s thing of think globally, act globally. New Zealand's future, this is a quote from the Herald, from one of our politicians. New Zealand's future growth has to be from selling things to the rest of the world they want to pay for. This is the standard line. Well, I say, no, it's not. I'd say, think and act globally. Future growth from selling things to ourselves we want to pay for. You know? Rebuilding our clothing and textile industries, which still do very good things, but have been carved out by free trade. And I think most of the Asian countries have figured this out. And we should perhaps learn from what they're doing too. So, but I don't have a magic bullet to do that. I've got a whole bunch of little bullets here, if you like. I think an economic strategy to restore decent standards of living through earned incomes in New Zealand would be rebuilding manufacturing. I think we should consider putting tariffs back on imports. The same, not pick and choose stuff, not getting cute, but just saying we'll reweight the parameters of the economy towards import substitution as much as exporting more. Higher minimum wage, for sure. Bite the bullet, which is a tough one, on ask if having benefit system, which gives people just enough to live on, without working, without paid work, is sustainable in the long run. I don't think it is. I'd say a small guaranteed annual income of $5,000–10,000 a year might be affordable. Very generous child care, like the Scandinavian countries have. A focus on health, not healing. And I mean literally health now, being helping people. Schools have a tough job to do at the moment, often. They need part of this. Maybe even lower taxes in the end, but everybody paying a share, if you don't like that. And in pulling back some of the top incomes, starting with the public sector, I've pointed out that the increases in incomes right here in this university, the Vice Chancellor getting at $600 and something thousand a year. If his income had gone up at the same rate, if the Vice Chancellor's income had gone up at the same rate as other workers' incomes, including our incomes, academics, in the last 20-some years, the salary would be about 300 and something thousand. That's still a reasonable salary, but it would be a lot less. So the public sector could take the lead here. And then make sure we're not being ripped off on the things we buy, paying too much for our power and stuff like that. So, is it politically feasible? So my last slide. I better stop because if I can have any questions on it, I'll only have 10 minutes for the taxi. Perhaps I'm going to. I don't think with US stalemate type politics, anything can be done because you're just someone who always blocked. What I do think is that once you get right-wing people, thoughtful, reasonable right-wing people saying, we agree this is a big problem, then you've got to start. But if you give it, but we also think the beneficiary, the benefit culture or whatever, if you can call it that, has gone too far. And if you could have people say, okay, let's see what we could do, which would help both those things. And then you might have finding common ground. It doesn't mean there'll be no more politics, no more disagreement, but there might be some possibility of making progress. And well, the last point there is just simply that these are not zero-sum games and stuff. But once you start doing good things, they tend to reinforce each other and make other things easier to achieve. So sorry to rush through that, but that's, I think, I'll have to rush in 10 minutes to get a taxi, my friend's launch. Be happy to hear questions from there.
I have a conceptual question. What always puzzles me a little bit is the focus on the focus on inequality is fine, but why the focus on the inequality of income? Shouldn't it rather be the focus on the inequality of need satisfaction that actually matters?
Satisfaction.
Need satisfaction. Satisfaction of the kinds of things that a human being needs to live well as a human being.
Yeah.
And I can understand that, of course, income is much easier to measure, and there are a lot of problems with need satisfaction. But need satisfaction seems to be the thing that actually matters, don't you think?
Yeah, I do agree with that. Income is only part of things we need.
Well, you know, how much a person has as an income might be entirely unrelated to how well she lives, because people might, somebody who has 10 times the income might consume the same things as I do, but uses the money for other things, for charity or God knows for what, and the inequality of income in itself wouldn't actually be an issue for me as long as that person uses the money in a reasonable way.
I know, but as a matter of fact, not everyone's a Warren Buffett.
Sure.
So I don't think we can rely on charity. I mean, it's a help. I took the first point as saying, really what I was alluding to a bit at the beginning, that income itself, like cash, is not the whole story. But it's part of the story, especially if you haven't done much of it.
Oh, sorry, so do you think it's more about inequality of skills and what comes up?
No. Well, that's another, I'll have to talk about that. I don't even think, yeah, that's right. People say redistribute income and more education and upskill the workforce. I don't think that's true. I think the key has to be, going back to where we were, there were things wrong with our economy in the 60s, in the golden age, but an unskilled person, perhaps because the person wasn't even very bright, could go to work in the morning and do an honest, solid day's work and get a living paycheck. I think out of that. That's the golden age. You might observe people with higher education get more money, but if you try to send everybody to university,
degree education, right?
well, you just all be competing for same job, and you suddenly find wages drop. So I don't think education is a panacea, not in terms of sort of qualification.
Do you think income inequality leads to greater corruption as well? Because people who have more income, they can do more lobbying behind the scenes and all that kind of stuff than the poorer people.
It doesn't. Yeah, it does. It doesn't. To have an honest society, always full of saints, has to be full of people who think there's some basic fairness there. If you don't think things are fair, you'll perhaps start stealing, or if you aren't held back in an unrestrained greed, you might start being corrupt. Yeah.
Would you say that globalization is a shift in terms of being able to shift money offshore? I'm not saying that if you lower the taxes, they bring some of it back, but whatever sort of policy that we institute here, if they can screw us over, people are causing the problem, by doing something cutting offshore, then they will. So how do we really get around that? It seems like any sort of strategy you put, they're going to go, how can I either outsource this to somebody else or hide it over here?
Well, I probably can't solve it ever fully, but there is our proposal is something called the token tax or financial transactions tax, which is just a tiny tax on hot money, or some short-term capital flows, so people moving money out and then bringing it back in. It's a tiny tax. It doesn't discourage them from doing something useful, like building a factory or something, but it does discourage them from at least from speculative behaviour. And that was regarded as total anathema in the Orthodox parts of the world 10 years ago, but now even the IMF is starting to say, oh, there might be something in this. So people are changing capital controls in general. People are saying, gee, the global financial crisis was partly an epidemic across the world, and if there had been some barriers to stopping the money flying backwards and forwards so fast, perhaps we wouldn't have so much instability. Yeah.
What's the idea of maximum income? Like
Maximum
say
income.
you can't earn, like we cap the salary of people earn like $1 million.
Like where, sorry?
I don't know, like $5,000.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell me a place where they do this. Like,
No, I was just, I heard it.
a maximum income. Yes. I think there should be a maximum income. It should be wherever I'm earning the money. The maximum income is the vote. So I don't know. I don't mind a bit of inequality. But some European countries just don't have nearly so much inequality as we do. Their CEOs just don't ask for it, don't want so much money. You know? So it's a culture of saying what's reasonable and what's fair. And I think you might want to, I don't think you ever perfectly get total income cap off the ground. I don't think we really need that to be a bit better.
I think there is an example of that in the 15th in the US, where the top marginal tax rate was something like 90%.
Oh, okay. In the US, and of course, the UK had very high minimum wage.
So that's effectively something
Yeah,
like that.
it did. Yeah, a lot of people were still extremely rich. So there's ways around these things. But yeah, I suppose that's true. The progressive taxation was much more progressive than you're right. And even New Zealand 20 years ago, the marginal income tax at the top was 65%, I think, and it had been higher than that. You can do that, but you might just force them to take the money offshore, to hide it from you in trusts, and to do cunning things.
The thing, I can think of, can't people just hide their money in their own businesses? Like, if there's just a cap on personal income, then that's not the money their business that they own is making.
Well, I don't think you can put a cap on personal income. I mean, you could do things like changing the salaries of vice chancellors and that, and push all the other salaries down there. You can do certain things, but you maybe it should cap. Maybe civil service salaries say no one gets more than $300,000 a year. That might be good.
Well, what I mean is, if you put a cap on personal income, then wouldn't that give a bias towards business owners if they could basically hide half of their money as money their business is making, not money that they are making?
Yeah. Well, you two better discuss it, because I'm not really into putting a cap on things. I don't think I do.
I don't know, I don't hear people talk about this.
I'm not really in favor. I just thought that maybe that's a reason why it's a bad idea if it gave bias towards business owners rather than other people.
Then what's that money in the business? How are they going to get access to it?
Well, if you own the business, then you own the money that the business has on it.
You can't use it for like caviar and beer.
I think a lot of businesses do though.
You guys have dialogue on this, and I'll leave you to it. I have one more question.
How well do you think New Zealand can actually do something like this on its own, given the context of all these other countries where it is, running rampant? I mean, how much, if you start putting pressure on salaries to come more in line together, then what's to stop the people at the top from just skipping off?
Well, which many didn't do anyway. Yeah.
Which many of them do anyways, but wouldn't that further just encourage that?
So I'd say, well, why do people live in New Zealand, people who can work anywhere? And New Zealanders are probably the most mobile people in the world in terms of being able to get jobs, because they want to live here, because they think it's a good place to live, a decent society. Basically, all those things, a healthy, decent, sane society. People would say, oh, maybe I don't need $600,000 a year to be a CEO. I'll come to New Zealand and do it for $250,000 and further down. I think if we don't think we can change anything because we're small or because people will run away, we'll never get anything done. I don't think we should be fatalistic about that. I really think think locally, act locally, has got a bit of mileage to it. I'll leave you with that. And thank you very much. And